Alrighty, in this episode it's time to finish building the fence. I'm very excited to have made it this far and to see how it turns out. First up, I'm going to trim the face pieces down to the exact size. Sew on with some blue painter's tape on each end and then I flip it over and clamp it down on some blocks. Back again to using the handsaw to cut the excess. This doesn't take very long to get both ends done. After a quick clean up, I remove the blue tape and it's come up nicely. You can see what it looks like from this end view of the fence. Time to sand the ends to smooth them up, and while doing this I noticed that a split in the wood caused a large piece to dislodge. The fix for this is to cover it in glue and then tape it up. Being on the inside of the face it won't matter, at that far end it's purely cosmetic. One thing I do need to do to the faces is put a small chamfer on the bottom outwards facing edge. The instructions tell me to do this for dust relief. Now I get to use the router table for what it's designed for, routing something. It doesn't take long to make these passes on the faces, and I'm paying extra special attention to my hands here. I think I'm going to have to make some special push sticks that use a non-slip pad for doing these sorts of routes, as I'm not entirely comfortable having my fingers so close to the router bit. Now moving on to the last major component of the fence is the clamping system. This requires an arm piece that is 3/4 of an inch thick and then a spacer that is the thickness of the tabletop minus 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to use the leftover pieces from the last milling process and glue 3 of them together to make one large piece. They only need to be 8 inches long, so I'm sure I can get some good bits in my remaining pieces. 3 cuts later on the miter sled and I'm ready to glue these up. One piece is taller than the other two, so I'm making that the middle piece, and then once the glue is dry I'll trim it to size on the table saw. Using liberal amounts of glue on all the faces, I clamp them together and put it to the side to dry. Now that I've trimmed the faces down to size, I want to give them a good sanding on all sides, as these are finished. However, if you remember back to after I sanded the face with the resin, the wood was darker in these areas and it kind of stood out. So I've decided to try something new, and that is to cover their faces with a coating of resin. Once it's cured, I'll sand it all back and then the wood should have a uniform finish. In preparation for this, I'm putting blue painter's tape around all edges, as I only want the resin on the face, not on the sides. Once this is done, and the edges are fanned out, I mix up some more resin and use a spatula to apply it all over. It's amazing how much the resin brings out the deep red colour of the red gum, and it really highlights the green. I'm going to have to explore this some more in future projects. I leave this overnight, and when I come back the next day it's dried nice and hard and still looks great. It's time to peel off the blue tape from around the edges, which can be a little tricky in some sections. I'm now going to sand it back, as this is the fence face and it needs to be flat. Right now it might look pretty, but it's quite uneven across the surface. I use my orbital sander to cut back most of the cured resin and then use increasing grades of sandpaper to bring it down to a smooth finish. While we don't have the glossy finish from the resin, it is now more uniform instead of a couple of dark patches like we had before. The faces are finished now, and I'll put them to the side until we're ready to give them a waxing with all the other fence pieces. Now it's time to get back to the clamping system. The 3 pieces are glued together and now dry, and I can go ahead and trim them down to size. I start off with removing the uneven side first, and then I adjust the fence a small amount and trim the parallel face for a nice, clean, even cut, and I'm very happy here with the result. Then, after referring to my notes, I trim this piece down to the same width as the bottom of the fence. Next up is to mark out the shape of the bottom clamps, as from this one piece of wood I'll end up with a clamp for each side of the fence. I'm going to use the table saw miter sled to cut a dado in the middle, and at the same time I'll bevel the outside bottom corners. This doesn't take long to do, and now it's time to sand out the grooves left behind by the table saw blade. And you know what? It kinda looks like an 80s telephone, don't you think? Almost like I'm in the NASCAR pit lane talking to Ricky Bobby on the racetrack. Anyways, that's enough tomfoolery. My instructions tell me I need to make some splines to go between the fence and the clamps. These splines act as a hinge apparently. Now the piece of offcut from earlier happens to be just the size I need when I cut this piece in two. The two half pieces I'll end up will be the same thickness as the table saw blade itself, which means the blade will be able to cut the curves for the spline, which makes things really easy. I'll be using the miter sled again to cut this piece down to size. First the length and then the width, paying very close attention to where my fingers are at all times. I need to set the cut depth of the table saw to 7.5 millimeters. I will then cut the curve for the spline half an inch from the bottom of the fence and the top of the clamp. This leaves a 4 millimeter gap between the two pieces and allows the clamp to relax when not having pressure applied by the carriage bolt. I use a block on the miter sled to ensure these cuts are all the same spacing, ensuring the curves on both pieces correctly line up. It just so happens my camera battery died during this step, however, here you can see the end result. It's now time to cut this piece in half, so I'll end up with two separate clamp pieces. With this done, you can see how the fence clamps to the table using the offcut from the tabletop insert hole. The spline still needs a little more sanding so it fits properly in the hole. I don't want to force it as it's only a thin piece of wood and could break easily. I need to drill the hole for the carriage bolt that will pass through both the fence and the clamp. First up, I mark out the location of the hole. It's 1 3/4 of an inch in from the inside of the clamp. Once I've done this to both pieces, I drill a pilot hole to make it easier to line up the 8 millimeter drill bit I'll be using next. Before drilling the hole though, I've realised that I've not sanded this face of the fence yet, so no time like the present I say. After this distraction, I use some double-sided tape to set the clamps in place for when I drill the carriage hole, as I don't want them to be moving about in relation to the spline locations. I'm going to drill the carriage hole using my drill press, and due to the length of the fence, I can't use the table of the drill press, so I'm sitting it on the base. Due to this, I'm only able to drill so far before I need to drop the drill bit in the jaws to get it to go a bit deeper. Even with this, I need to finish the hole off using my hand drill. With the fence clamped to the table, I'm able to get the hole drilled a bit further into the fence. However, there's only so far I can go before it's time to remove the clamp piece and finish the hole off. At this point, I decided to switch to the electric drill as the hardwood was a bit tough and I found I was wobbling too much with the hand drill. I repeated the same steps again on the other side, and before too long I had these holes all finished. Now with the holes drilled, let's see how the pieces align with the bolts. Everything seems to go together nicely. I haven't installed the spines just yet, I'll get to them soon. First, I want to mark out the bolt heads on the underside of the clamps, as I want to chisel these hexagonal shapes into the clamps. This will prevent the bolts from spinning when I tighten up the fence using the knobs. Before I do the chiseling, I'm going to spend the time now to sand the splines down so they fit into the curves without needing to be forced. This doesn't take that long, and with the splines in the curves, I can now mark their lengths so I can cut them down to size. I take them together, clamp them down on some scrap and use my hand saw to cut them to length. I double check them in the clamps and they are perfect. Time to put them aside in a safe place. Now I can get back to chiseling the hexagons into the clamps. I start off using a wider chisel and make cuts around all 6 sides, and then switch to a narrow chisel and cut around the line of the bolt head. I then remove the waste, and when I put the bolt in, it works exactly as intended. I like when things go as planned. I repeat this on the other side, and I'm one step closer to finishing the fence. Speaking of finishing, I'm going to apply the same wax to the fence that I used on the outer edges of the tabletop. Before doing this though, I spent a bit of time with the air compressor blowing away all the sawdust from the pieces. The red gum sawdust is quite fine. With that task complete, let's get the wax and apply it to all of the fence pieces. I try and get into all the crevices of the wood and also getting into those slots where the threaded knobs pass through. The wax really brings out the colour of the red gum wood. You can see how the darkness of the wood varies in different sections. However, I'm quite happy with the face pieces, as these are where I experimented with the resin and you really can't tell without looking up close. I'll leave this for about half an hour while the wax is absorbed into the wood and come back to give it a wipe over with a clean cloth. There's hardly any residue. It seems to have set nicely into the wood, which will not only protect it but also provide a smooth surface when being used. It's now time to assemble the fence and put it on the table. I'll start off with installing the T-track back into the fence. The aluminium looks nice, contrasted against the red gum. Next up is to install the faces with the threaded knobs holding them in place. It's really coming together now. It looks like it's ready for business. Now with the router table in position, I can put the fence on top. I feed the bolt through the left clamp and then install it underneath the edge of the table with the bolt coming up into the fence. I fill about for a bit, getting the spine aligned with the kerf on the fence, and then it just pops into place. Beautiful! I throw a washer on top and then the threaded knob, and oh boy, it feels great to be getting this all together. I repeat the same on the right hand side and bingo bango, I've got a fence for my router table. I give the knobs on top a tightening and test the fence out, and it's clamped firm. This bad boy isn't going anywhere. Now let's try out the sliding faces. They work a treat, exactly as they should. I'm super happy with the outcome of this fence on the router table. Not only does it look amazing, but it feels sturdy and is going to be extremely useful in future projects. I can't wait. I've still got to build the accessories. They are a handguard, a featherboard, a vacuum attachment, and a safety power switch. Stay tuned to the next video where I start work on these. I don't expect they will take very long, as they seem pretty simple. I hope you feel as excited as I do about finishing the fence. Let me know what you think of it in the comments below. Until next time, bye!